Greetings, everyone, from the Blessed Michael McGivney Center in New Haven, Connecticut. My guest today, again, is Andy Fowler, who was the author and the curator of this wonderful online exhibit that the Blessed Michael McGivney Pilgrimage Center has been featuring on the game of baseball and its connection with the Knights of Columbus. Andy, greetings. Thank you for joining me again.
Thank you for having me back, Peter.
Oh, I'm excited. We have reached the culmination of the 2021 Major League Baseball season, the World Series, the Fall Classic. And before long, we will crown a champion. But it's very interesting that this this annual fall contest that has been now going on for more than a century so much embodies some of the things that you've already brought up in your online exhibit, which is at michaelmcgivneycenter.org. Your online baseball exhibit talks about the fact that baseball unites people. It brings them together. And I'm sure
Right.
people are getting together to watch the World Series. It's probably a lot of what Father McGivney saw in the game, because naturally unity was very important for he and the Knights of Columbus.
Yeah, I mean, I will definitely be one of those people watching the series upcoming. So yeah, and that's definitely one of the themes I wanted to stress, that and the fraternal aspect of the game and how that has that has united the Knights as well. Just baseball is a uniting. Even if you're, yeah, my dad's a Yankee fan and my mom's a Red Sox fan, but they have united and become their own family. So
I call that a mixed marriage.
yeah,
Well, listen, without further delay, I'd like you to talk about the research you've done specifically on the World Series and the connection that it has with the Knights of Columbus. So, to our viewers, I'm going to step aside for a minute and let Andy give you a presentation. I'll join you toward the end of our session. Andy,
great,
all yours.
great. Well, thank you, Peter, once again. I'm glad to be back to talk more about the Knights of Columbus's rich history with America's pastime, more specifically about the Knights in the Fall Classic, the World Series. Although there's no specific subsection in the exhibit of KFC Baseball: An American Story about the World Series, with the series upon us, it's a good time as any to do another deep dive and showcase how individual members of the Knights of Columbus led their teams to titles and etched themselves into baseball legend. So the discussion will span from the very first World Series in 1903 to the 21st century. So there will be a sneak peek for what future segments or bases of that this exhibit will cover. But I think a good place to start is how the World Series began. I bet there are a lot of listeners and viewers out there who might already know this story. So I'll be as brief as I can, but for those who don't know, I hope you could take some of these factoids and to help you win the next trivia night. So as discussed in first base, uh, the National League formed in the mid 1870s, and the very first hit in that league was done by Knight of Columbus Jim O'Rourke. The Professional Baseball League didn't have a monopoly on professional baseball per se. I mean, I guess in a legal sense, but it was the powerhouse. By 1901, you had franchises like the Pittsburgh Pirates, Philadelphia Phillies, St. Louis Cardinals, New York Giants, Cincinnati Reds, and so on. However, in that same year, another upstart league founded by Byron Bancroft Ban Johnson was formed, and that was the American League. You know, fun fact about the American League, it was formerly a minor league circuit called the Western League. And Johnson wanted to challenge his teams and showcase their worthiness to become a major league, yet the National League would barely even recognize him. There's even a story that Johnson wanted to address the National League owners at their annual meeting, but they left him waiting in the hallway. So when National League teams began to struggle financially in cities like Boston, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C., Johnson formed new teams, signed former National League players, all while promising fans a cleaner version of the game. And surprisingly, it actually worked. You know, the new major league was so successful that National League owners sued for peace in 1903. The two leagues formed the National Baseball Commission to preside over organized baseball. But the World Series was not born out of that necessarily. It was actually a challenge presented by Pirates team owner Barney Dreyfuss against the best American League team, which happened to be the Boston Americans that year. So on October 1st, so on October 1st, 1903, the first World Series game was played at the Huntington Avenue baseball grounds in Boston. The Pirates were led by not only the legendary Honus Wagner, but player manager and Knight of Columbus Fred Clark, who led the majors that season in slugging percentage and OPS. And Clark's Pirates won Game 1, 7-3 against Boston's future Hall of Famer Cy Young. Yet it was another Knight of Columbus who Sabres said set the standard. Oh, sorry, who set the standard for World Series excellence, and that was Boston Americans pitcher Bill Dineen. Now, Bill Dineen, as you can see, had 3 wins. He pitched 2 shutouts and had an ERA of 2.06 and 28 strikeouts. I mean, it was just a remarkable series that he had. And Boston ended up winning the series 5-3 over the Pirates in a 9-game series. But in the next year, oh, sorry, once again, in the next year there was no World Series in 1904. The only other time that the World Series never happened in its whole history was 1994. But in 1904, the Boston Americans repeated as American League pennant winners, but the National League pennant was claimed by the New York Giants, who were managed by Knight of Columbus, John McGraw, who's pictured here. And at the time, McGraw and American League president Ban Johnson had a beef, going back to when Johnson suspended McGraw and was late when McGraw was the manager of the Baltimore Orioles, the American League Baltimore Orioles. So the decision to not play against the American League team was personal for McGraw, so no World Series was played. However, McGraw relented the next year after his Giants won the pennant again and squared off against the Philadelphia Athletics, who were managed by another Knight of Columbus, Connie Mack. McGraw's squad bested Mack's team 4-1, but it would not be the only time the two would meet in the World Series. In fact, Connie Mack's teams later on would actually best McGraw's. But in the first 20 World Series, so from 1903 to 1924, because of the skipped year, a Knight of Columbus managed at least one, if not both, pennant winners in 18 of those World Series. This includes McGraw, Connie Mack, as well as Bill Kerrigan with the Boston Red Sox, Huey Jennings with the Detroit Tigers, Pat Moran with the Cincinnati Reds, and Fred Clark with the Pirates. And out of 18, 9 of those titles were clinched by Knights. So the successful teams in the early days of the World Series were led by Knights. And you could see on this chart, the ones that I have in bold are the ones that the managers actually won. But eventually Connie Mack, as I state there, is he won 5 total in his career, and McGraw would win 3. And baseball is known for its miracles. It's miraculous turnarounds or moments that are forever etched in the history of the game. And one of the earliest examples is the 1914 Boston Braves. The team was in last place by July 4th of that year. However, even though the team was in the basement, they had a man who could motivate the team to not give up on the season. And that man was Knight of Columbus, Johnny Evers. And you could see him, I don't know if you could see my pointer, but this is him sitting on the ground right there. But Evers had signed a 4-year contract in February 1914, and he had won several World Series titles with the Chicago Cubs in 1907 and 1908. He was an experienced veteran, and according to teammates like Hall of Famer and Knight of Columbus, Rabbit Marinville, he took his mission as team captain very seriously. And under his leadership, the Braves went from last place to first place within 10 weeks, a remarkable turnaround, and then swept the Athletics in the World Series. And for his part, Evers had a fantastic World Series, batting .438, and he ended up receiving the National League MVP for that season, which was then called the Chalmers Award. And this team is now known, as the slide suggests, as the Miracle Braves, one of the most famous teams in World Series history. But no discussion about the World Series would be complete without mentioning one of the darker episodes in the game's history, the infamous Black Sox Scandal. Now, eight, for those that don't know, the 1919 World Series, 8 members of the Chicago White Sox were accused of taking bribes from mob bosses to throw the series, meaning they would purposely lose games to get a cut of the gambling winnings. And at the time, the White Sox roster did actually include members of the Knights of Columbus, such as Urban Red Faber, who's a Hall of Famer, outfielder Eddie Murphy, and relief pitcher John Sullivan. But thankfully, according to Columbia, there were no Knights who were among the 8, and we'll see that headline in a few seconds. That they even had a blurb stating "No Black Sox here," further stating, "quote The canard that the uncelebrated Black Sox were Knights has long been exploded." And in fact, a Knight, John Shano Collins, was denoted as the wronged party in the Black Sox scandal when the first indictments came down against the Black Sox in March 1921. But the rumors of a fix being in, as they say, swirled around even at the time of the 1919 World Series between the White Sox and the Cincinnati Reds. And Pat Moran, who was a Knight and manager of the Reds, reportedly confronted players about the fix aimed at Reds players, including pitcher Hod Eller. Apparently, Moran stated to Eller, like, one wrong move and you're out of the game. And Moran had a reputation of being a clean manager and maintained that for his team throughout the controversial series, a series he eventually won. But the scandal nearly destroyed the reputation of Major League Baseball and the sport. However, and thankfully, it was saved by the bat of Knight of Columbus, Babe Ruth. But before I get into that, this is, as you can see, this is the Columbia no Black Sox here, and yet they just were very fervent on stating that no member was a member of the Knights of Columbus. But also no World Series talk would be complete without talking about the Yankees. Now, for most of the mid 20th century, the game was pretty much ruled by the New York Yankees. A time I longed for as a disgruntled Yankees fan. But neither Joe McCarthy or Casey Stengel were members of the Knights of Columbus, at least that we know of right now. However, no talk about the World Series and its history could happen without the mention of one of the most memorable and debatable moments during the Fall Classic. Did Babe Ruth really call his shot? And the Babe, I should note, was a member of the Knights. He joined Pierre Marquette Council in Boston back when he was a member of the Red Sox. But on October 1st, 1932, at Wrigley Field during Game 3 of the World Series, the Cubs bench jockeys, as they were called, were heckling the great Bambino during his at-bat during the 5th inning. And after strike 2, Ruth made a gesture like this, either toward the dugout or to center field, and then hit a home run, breaking a 4-4 tie. The headline and story of Ruth calls shots spread across the country, despite its possible and more than likely misinterpretation of the facts. Ruth didn't even disprove the event, though, saying it's in the papers, isn't it? And this moment, I don't know, classic movie fans out there, this reminds me of a line from the John Ford movie, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Like, when the legend becomes fact, print the legend. And this moment certainly solidified the legend in Babe Ruth's myth, in his mythos. But it is also considered one of the greatest moments in World Series history, if it indeed actually happened. And the Yankees would eventually prevail in that series. And here's another fun fact for our viewers and listeners out there. So between 1954 to 1971, the Knights of Columbus actually owned the land to Yankee Stadium. During that time, the Yankees were still a perennial powerhouse behind the bats of Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, the glove of Yogi Berra, and the pitching of Whitey Ford. And they appeared in the World Series 9 times and won 4 during that span. And also at the time, Supreme Knight Luke Hart said the purchase was, of course, the largest check I ever signed. Now, the Knights not only purchased the land as a smart business venture, but also for the publicity. And this is Supreme Knight Luke Hart in Yankee Stadium in the bleachers. And this is what he wrote in January 1954 about it. He said, quote, "Because of the publicity attaching to this transaction, Many citizens have been aroused to an awareness of the Knights of Columbus, who, until then, were not fully conscious of its existence, or if they were conscious of its existence, had no realization of its importance. Now they know, end quote. The Knights eventually had to relinquish the rights to the field, though, at Yankee Stadium when the city of New York purchased it in 1971 under eminent domain. But it's fun to think that Yankee Stadium was owned by the Knights and that it was a field of winners at that time, as I dubbed it. But no, but one series the Yankees did not prevail in between 1954 to 1971 was the 1960s World Series against the Pittsburgh Pirates. At the time, the Yankees were entering their 10th World Series appearance since 1954, while the Pirates had not won a pennant since 1927. And only the year before, the Pirates finished with a 78-76 record, and the team had been primarily basement dwellers, finishing 7th or 8th in the National League for most of the 1950s. However, the Pirates began turning their winning prospects around with the hire of former player and Knight of Columbus, Danny Murtaugh. I should stress, though, the sports media did not believe in the Pirates, especially in early 1960. Although Murtaugh did, and so did his players. They jumped out to a record of 12-3 by May 1st, taking hold of first place, and then they held it for the rest of the season. Yet the World Series itself was so lopsided. I mean, the Yankees had monster run tallies in 3 games. They scored like 13, 10, and 12 in some games, but the Pirates eked out enough narrow victories to force a Game 7 at Forbes Field in Pittsburgh. It was here one of the greatest moments of the World Series happened. In the bottom of the ninth, with the score tied, Bill Mazeroski of the Pirates hit a walk-off home run, and so to win the series. And so the unlikeliest team to win the World Series had one behind manager and Knight, Murtaugh, who was credited for his strategy in regards to the use of his pitchers, especially ace Vernon Law. I should note a note about Murtaugh, though. He was very active in the Knights of Columbus, and he was even honored as Knight of the Year in Pittsburgh in 1972. His daughter also spoke more about her father's faith, telling Columbia, "I remember being embarrassed when the nuns would tell my whole elementary school, watch Danny Murtaugh when he goes to receive the Holy Eucharist. He's a famous baseball manager, and look how reverent he is. If he could be so devout, you can too." I mean, and this is an aside, but isn't that such a powerful statement, especially in a time when belief in the real presence has waned? I think Knights and Catholics can learn something from Murtaugh's reverence. But 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 back to baseball. Um, from 1969 on, and jumping from the Bronx to Queens, entering the 1969 season, the New York Mets, who only formed a few years before, were 100-1 odds to win the pennant, according to Baseball in Illustrated History. The team had promising young talent, including future Hall of Famers Tom Seaver and Nolan Ryan, but they fumbled out of the gate, losing 7 of their first 10 games. I mean, despite the early season struggles, Knight of Columbus and manager Gil Hodges remained confident in his team and often used humor to stoke the faith of his players. But the Mets remarkably turned their season around and beat the odds by not only winning the National League pennant, but also defeating the Baltimore Orioles in 5 games to win the World Series. For their victory, the team has been dubbed the Miracle Mets, since they were the first team to win the title after finishing at least 15 games under 500 the previous season. And for his efforts, Hodges was named Manager of the Year. However, he only spent a few more seasons with the Mets because he sadly passed away from a heart attack on April 2nd, 1972, which coincidentally that year was Easter Sunday. But like the Miracle Braves, the Miracle Mets are one of the most famous and maybe lovable teams to win the World Series of all time. And but back to the Bronx real quickly. uh, Another World Series hero in 1977 and 78, who was a Knight of Columbus, was Ron Guidry, the Louisiana Lightning. In those series, he won both of the games he started, striking out 11, and gave up only 3 earned runs. And in the great line of Knights of Columbus managers, we would have to include Tom Kelly of the Minnesota Twins. He won two close, electrifying fall classics in 1987 and 1991 against the St. Louis Cardinals and Atlanta Braves, respectively. Both went to Game Sevens, and in 2003, ESPN called the latter series one of the greatest of all time in their commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the World Series. And when I spoke to Mr. Kelly a few years ago, he told me before Game 7, as he was leaving his house, that he just didn't want to screw anything up, and just to give players the opportunity to win. And he went on to tell me that didn't necessarily happen, but the Twins prevailed in the end anyway. And another prominent night in more recent World Series games would have to be the Flying Hawaiian, Shane Victorino, who was a member of the 2008 Phillies and 2013 Red Sox championship teams. One of his most memorable moments was in Game 6 of the 2013 American League Championship Series when he hit a grand slam against the Detroit Tigers. And I know the Red Sox lost, but eventually lost this year. But just grand slams seem to be their MO recently in playoff series. But to wrap up this presentation, let me just say that there are more stories that I haven't gotten into, and they'll be more explored fully in future segments of the exhibit. But just to suffice it to say, it's remarkable to see the positive impact that individual Knights of Columbus had on the game and how they've made a mark on the story of baseball, especially in October. So if you like this talk and you want to learn more about the Knights and their history with America's pastime and their impact on the game, you could go see the exhibit, visit michaelmcgivneycenter.org. And if you want to learn more about the Knights of Columbus, please visit kfc.org/join us and become a member of our great team. And with that, I will close our presentation and just thank you so much for listening and for watching.
Thank you very much, Andy. The Fall Classic, the World Series, is so steeped in tradition, and it's exciting as a member of the Knights of Columbus to think of all of these names, and they're not obscure names. They're names that are well known. Uh, I mean, certainly Connie Mack and Babe Ruth, some of the giants in the game in its early period, and then, as you say, later, Shane Victorino, Tom Kelly, hugely successful, Ron Guidry, all of these players that were household names during the periods in which they were successful in enjoying World Series victories. So the organization has a great tradition of its own. It's linked um, hand in glove, if you will, if I can use that
I
analogy,
like it.
with the game of baseball, and even more so with the Fall Classic. And of course, Yankee Stadium hosted so many World Series, and to think that the playing grounds for so many of those competitions was actually owned by the Knights of Columbus. They were hosting America's Fall Classic. What a great thought. Gives members of the Knights of Columbus, no doubt, a great deal of pride.
Yeah, definitely some bragging rights for sure for the Knights of Columbus. Just yeah, if only they owned Fenway Park too. For Peter Sonsky is our resident Red Sox fan here.
Well, there's still time. But in any case, to echo Andy's invitation to those of you, if you've not visited the exhibition, please do so. The online exhibition talks all about the long history of the Knights of Columbus, beginning with the very founder of the Knights of Columbus, Father Michael McGivney, and how all throughout its entire existence, the game has been linked with the Knights of Columbus. It's always had this Catholic dimension. So uh, view the online exhibit at michaelmcgivneycenter.org, and be mindful of upcoming additional segments on that series. Andy has talked about the early part of baseball. In further segments that will be introduced during 2022, we'll talk about the period during World War I and World War II, and then more contemporary times. But thank you very much for your interest. Thank you very much for enjoying the game of baseball and for your support of the Knights of Columbus. Andy, Um, Thank you for all of the dedicated work that you've done, and I look forward to more contributions from you as we move forward in this online exhibit.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you again to all of our listeners.
So long.